Are they still standing is what I wanted to talk to you about briefly. Come back with me to Israel, to Mount Carmel. It's late in the afternoon. We've just thought about Elijah and the incredible contest. If you were with a student group, you got about halfway down, and since Elijah went up and down and up and down and up and down, you decided to go back up and do the Shema up on top before you began the hike. On the way down, we came across an olive grove. Do you remember? Some say the oldest working olive grove in Israel. I don't know that to be a fact, but some say it is. I love that old olive tree, and I expect that many of you have your picture or have a picture of you somewhere near this tree. Well, as I come to that tree every time, it strikes me that in a way that tree is a summary of who I am as a follower of Jesus, my rabbi. I have Jewish roots. I'm not Jewish at all. As far as I can go back, I have nothing Jewish blood at all. But I'm rooted in the people of God of the Bible. And I need my Jewish roots. But, by the grace of God, I am also a believer and follower of Rabbi Yeshua. So what Israel has meant to me, and I think for many of you, if not all of you, is an opportunity as a Christian to discover again and to become excited again about your roots. Now, the question I would have at this point, and I always ask myself as I arrive at that olive tree, are there any olives? Because if you and I are the branches, according to Paul, grafted in if you're not Jewish, and we have not remained rooted in our Jewish faith, our Jewish roots, our Jewish ancestry, then there are no olives. And that's a great disappointment to the olive keeper. If we have remained rooted, but have chosen not to produce olives, that's also a great disappointment. And so if there are olives, when you arrive at that olive orchard, it always says to me, that's what God calls us to do and to be. Now, I'd like to take you to another place and move into, are they still standing? I don't know if you recognize it from an aerial view or not, but it's a place called Zippori. You remember the synagogue at Hoshea? And the little boys reading the scroll in the morning and going through the morning prayers. You remember the theater where we sat and talked about how often Jesus uses theater language. How many of you made the hike from Cana to Zippori across the fields? That was something we added in the last couple of years. Raise your hand if you made that hike. Okay, only a few of you. Good. That means I'm going to show you something that many of you have not seen. Maybe this will help you to remember Zippori. Anyway, it was a town not far from where Jesus lived. In fact, in the background, on the mountains beyond the group, is the town of Nazareth, or maybe better, the outskirts of Nazareth. From Nazareth to Zippori is about 3 miles. There is a reference in an ancient Jewish source to the fact that when Zippori was built during Jesus' lifetime, many, if not most, of the tectons, the stonemasons in the area, left home and went and worked for Herod or whoever was building the city of Zippori. So I love to walk from Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, to Zippori. Are you recalling this? Some of you didn't walk, but you remember Zippori. On the way, by the grace of God, a year or 2 or 3 ago, actually about 3 years ago, we stumbled across an ancient quarry. And having talked to James Strange, the archaeologist, one of the archaeologists from Zippori, he believes that that quarry is one of the quarries that was used to build that town. If so, it is possible, although we don't make a big case of this, but it is possible that Jesus, learning the trade from his father Joseph of how to build, including with stones, may have worked in this quarry. And if that seems too square inchy to you, you know we don't do the square inch thing, at very least, if Jesus and Joseph are growing up on that hillside over there, there's a city of 20, 30,000 people being built, and there is a large quarry, and that's their trade. I'll guarantee you Joseph and Jesus were familiar with that quarry. And it's really quite amazing to stand by that quarry or in that quarry and to imagine that those quarrying marks that you see to my left or where the group is standing here, to see those quarrying marks and realize that those are quarrying marks, some of which were put in place when Jesus was here on earth. And it's quite moving. But if you remember, those of you who've been there, that isn't the insight that really moved me the most, the fact that here we can see the kind of skill and trade that Jesus would have done. What moves me the most as I look at these quarrying marks in that ancient quarry about a mile outside of Zippori is a passage from the book of Isaiah. Say it with me. Listen, you who pursue righteousness, and seek after God. Remember the quarry from which you were cut.
Remember the quarry from which you were cut,
and the stone from which you were hewn.
and the stone from which you were hewn.
Remember Abraham your father, and Sarah who gave birth to you. Now, I'd like to have you think for just a few moments about that. Jesus knew the trade of stonemasonry. Whether you want to make him one like I do or not, he knew the trade. The image in the Bible is of Jesus, God, quarrying out of his great quarry stones. You are, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, living stones being built into his spiritual house. So I picture Jesus quarrying out of this ancient rock stones. And then slowly but surely by his strong tecton hands, to use the Greek, chiseling away at each stone, creating exactly the size and shape of stone that he desires so that it fits exactly into his house where he wants it to be. Now, two thoughts from that. The first, the quarry we've been chiseled out of is the same quarry out of which came Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Deborah and Gideon and David and Ruth and Hezekiah and Peter and Andrew and Martha and Miriam, and in his human nature, Jesus himself. We've been hewn out of the same quarry. We share a common origin as the people of God, maybe not racially, but a common origin of faith as the people of God with those great biblical characters. Do you know that you came by the grace of God out of the same rock that David came out of, and that Peter came out of, and that Susanna and Joanna came out of? That moves me. Partly because I tend to think that we, as Western Christians, look at the biblical characters as people of supernatural wisdom, supernatural strength, supernatural chutzpah and passion, when in fact, they were simply men and women hewn out of the same rock that we are. And what they had was the Spirit of God in their hearts, the text in their minds and in their souls, and a deep commitment to be what God wanted them to be. And there is no reason that out of this room, or others like it, even in the West, that a group of people could not come. There's no reason that a group of people could not arise by the grace of God, empowered by his Spirit, shaped by the chisel of his word, to become what those great biblical characters were in their day to the community we live in our day. I stood here in May, was the last, I guess, at this quarry with a group. And one of them stood there and chiseled away with a rock because he wanted to take a piece along to remember the moment. And he held it up, and he said, "You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that Elijah came out of this quarry. Look what Elijah accomplished in his life. What's my excuse? I came out of this quarry too." That moves me. It's not them and us. It's us. We are the stones quarried to be built into his house. But there's another bit to this faith lesson. Stay with me. You remember it. Those 2+ million stones on Herod's Temple Mount, each one carefully dressed with that distinctive Herodian design. Many of them dressed not on the job site, but off in the quarry. Each one prepared for a particular place in God's house. If you and I are a stone out of God's quarry, God has picked a place in the house that is his community for you and for me. There is a place for you as there is a place for me. I don't fit your place, you don't fit mine, but there is a place for every single one of us But you know what? As we come out of the quarry, we don't fit our place. We're rough. We've got pieces sticking out. We're too big. We're the wrong shape. And God, again, takes the hammer and chisel of the text and the hammer and chisel of life's experiences and chips away at me and at you to say, let me make you exactly what you need to be to fit the place I have picked. You remember picking up those little chips when we went to the Tzatatim, the Tectons in Bethlehem? Some of you still have your chip. Mine stands on the shelf right next to my desk. And when life deals those unpleasant or uncomfortable or downright painful things, one thing that helps me is to look at it and say, God, I don't know why this happened, and I may never know, but I do know I want you to use this experience to make me fit just a little bit better where you want me to be. But there's another thing about these delightful stones on Herod's Temple Mount. I've watched them slowly come out of the ground since 1976 when I was there the first time. First there were a few, and then as archaeology went on, more and more and more, until today, as most of you know, you can stand below either in the rabbinical tunnel or you can stand below at the foot of the Temple Mount on the street itself and see those magnificent stones. But out of all of them, this one is my favorite. Not because it's 650 metric tons. None of you have seen this one, I don't think. I don't think this was out of the ground when any of you were there. Maybe you guys who were there in the spring. That's my favorite stone. It's my favorite stone because that stone, uncovered very recently, was about 12 feet below the street. It had never seen the light of day since around zero, when it was put there as part of the foundation, covered up, and Herod's paved street put up against the wall. And look at it. It is as beautifully shaped and as carefully dressed by those tectons, those Tzatatim, as are the stones that you look at eye level. You know why? Because the masons that were making them were not working for Herod. He may have signed their paycheck. They weren't working for the Sadducean priesthood. They may have done the hiring and training and firing. The guys who built this were working for the one who lived in the house. And it didn't matter to them, apparently, whether they showed or not. And it strikes me that that's a compelling picture for the follower of Jesus for two reasons. One, so much of what you and I do in life is unseen and unknown by almost everyone. But the one who lives for someone outside of the public domain, that is the one who lives in the house of which you and I are stones. The one who builds for him is as careful about the unseen as the seen. In fact, I suggest you can judge the level of my or your commitment to the rabbi, not by what's seen in public, but by what is never seen. It will tell you who you live for, or who I live for. But you know what? There's another side to this. That stone, cut in a quarry some distance away, was cut for a place that would never be seen by anyone. But it's as important to the house where Almighty God lived, as is the cornerstone. So regardless of where God has placed you, you know, I stand here tonight, and I suppose because of video and publicity, you know me. I didn't wear a name tag. Probably should have, but I didn't wear a name tag. So I'm kind of public. But you know what? There are tons of people that you don't even know that if they weren't part of this, I wouldn't be here either. From my mom, who taught me to love Jesus when I was a little boy, to my grandpa, who gave me a free trip to Israel when I was a young man, to my wife, who stands by me in ways that you can't even imagine, to the staff in the office every day that before tonight you didn't even know. And it doesn't matter what your role is or mine in the house. The key is God has a place and will use the same care for you and me that he uses for the really important stones. But come with me to one more place. You recognize it? Of course you don't. You still had jet lag. Off the plane, use the washroom, come on, let's go on the bus. It's Tel Gezer, okay? And you know what comes at Tel Gezer? The standing stones. Now, I'd like to have you take that little standing stone and put it right where you can see it, or you can hold it if you want. You don't need to hold it, but have it where you can see it. You know the custom. In the ancient Near East, when something significant happens involving God, or a God, at least in the minds of the people, you stand up a stone, large or small, to draw attention to the place where that thing happened. Now, you don't write on the stone. That's a different kind of stone. The stone is like a silent testimony. But as you know, the custom is when people walk past the stones, they ask the question, why are these stones here? And then those who know, either those who placed the stone or those who know the story of the stone, give testimony to what God did. Let me tell you about God. Now, there were two kinds of stones, as you recall. There were stones set by pagans that drew attention to supposed powers and divinities besides the real, living God, in Peter's words. Those were to be dismantled. That's not the topic we could discuss tonight. I think there is a place and time for a Christian in a culture in the love of Jesus to show our world that many of its standing stones are flawed and false and point to powers that do not exist. The other kind of standing stone, God chose to use. Jacob, running for his life, owning nothing, not knowing where he was going or whether his uncle would accept him when he got there, has a dream of the power of God in a place. And he set up a stone to remember his dream. The elders at Mount Sinai, Joshua and the Israelites crossing the Jordan River, 7 times in the book of Joshua, set up standing stones so that when your children, and by implication, I suppose, your neighbors say, what happened here? You can say, let me tell you about the power of God. Now, I believe that one of the implications, the midrash maybe, behind the text of 2 Peter, where Peter says, you are living stones being built into his house, is not simply that we become the house of God like the temple was in biblical times, but as living stones, we become living standing stones. That is, our lives, our conduct, our speech, the way we treat those around us, draw attention. And then lead to the question, what is it about you? In the passage, Peter says, you are living stones. Live your lives in such a way that your pagan neighbors see you and give glory to God who is in heaven. The implication being that God calls us in some way to be, not like those were pagan, but to be silent stones, bearing witness to something far greater than ourselves and our accomplishments and our simple lives here on this earth, but bearing witness to the fact that there is a God who has acted and continues to act in history. But a standing stone without a witness is a waste. We stand by these stones, and inevitably people say to me, what were they for? Well, I can talk to you about the Canaanites and the gods in Canaan before Israel got there, because these were there before Israel got there, at least if the archaeologists are correct. But I don't know what they stand for. Others have guessed. The witnesses are gone. And it strikes me that one of the things that these standing stone symbols have helped to remind me is that it's not enough to live like the rabbi. It's not enough for a student to be like his teacher. we are also called upon, like a standing stone, to give testimony when others ask. What is it? And the testimony, of course, not let me tell you about me, but let me tell you about God. Now, you remember that moment for most of you, standing on that hill that first hot day, for most of you, hailstorm for a few of you, but that hot day, and thinking to yourself, who would say of you, you have been a standing stone? Do you remember thinking that? Just nod. It helps me feel like I was. How are you doing? Many in Israel have said, I'm going to go back and be a standing stone for my kids, my grandkids, my employees, my co-workers. How are you doing? Are the stones still standing? Or were you, like I'm tempted often, came back from Israel, stood big like a stone, living for Jesus for a week? And then the witness dimmed, and eventually the weeds grew, and the stone fell. Part of why, I think it was Mark Tanis's idea, but part of why I thought this was such a great idea is to ask you to take it along and to put it somewhere where you can see it and ask yourself occasionally, how am I doing? I've been cut out of that great quarry that has issued God's people throughout the generations. I've been shaped by the same master stonecutter as the heroes of the Bible. I am a standing stone by the grace of God. How are you doing? One last, and this is really nasty of me to do. I was going to show you some other standing stones, but the time is always, I love, there's a story here, but another time. I want to take you to another place, and this is not very nice. I want to take you to Turkey. How many of you were going to Turkey until, bless you. You would love the rest of the story. It's an amazing experience. Most of you studied the text here, as well as hundreds of other places, of course, in Israel. We had hoped to go here. And I'd like to take you there, Ephesus, just for a few minutes. I hesitate to do this because some of you, God willing, will go with us next fall. I don't want to spoil this, but I want to show you something that God put in my heart this past September. In fact, September 11 was for me a day in Ephesus that I will not soon forget. Amazing city. It has two biblical characters in particular, more than two, of course, but two for sure. Paul, there early, and John, probably with Mary, Jesus' mother, since he was responsible for her, later. When Paul arrived, the dominant practice of the city was the worship of the fertility goddess, the Greek Asia Minor fertility goddess, Artemis, the many-breasted one, or some say other things. We won't get into that tonight. The town was Neocorus, the Vatican, if I may use that, for her worship. It dominated everything in that town. What the Vatican is for the Catholic denomination, Ephesus was for Artemis. So the whole world revolved around her and her practice, which tended to be very immoral. And we won't get into that so much tonight because of the interest of time. But when Paul got there, her hold on the city was so strong and so compelling that naturally the gospel ran head on into who she was and what she represented for the town. The town, Ephesus, town, wrong word, city, was the richest, largest city in Asia Minor. And much of her wealth came from the pilgrims and the religious festivals that were held in the honor of Artemis. But even the wealth that came through Ephesus' natural place on what we in Israel called the Great Trade Route, this the branch through Asia, that too was attributed by the citizens of Ephesus not to God or even to the work of their hands, but to Artemis. And to come and suggest by his teaching that the God of the Bible is the only God, and that his way is the only way, and that Jesus is the only way to God, not only struck them philosophically and religiously, but it struck them economically in a big way. And Paul, with all the chutzpah of a good Jewish Talmud, wanting more and more and more to be like his rabbi, come lately, of course, for him, the Rabbi Jesus, brought that gospel right into the Shephelah of Asia Minor, Ephesus, except they don't call their Shephelah Shephelah. I think Shephelah for them is the Agora. We would call it the shopping mall. Just a note, my attraction to Mars Hill over here in Granville, and bless all of your churches, I'm really attracted to having a church in a shopping mall. I think it comes awfully close to how the early gospel was spread. So Paul brought the gospel and very deliberately undermined their entire system. In fact, as he walked down the streets of this city, every place he turned, the gospel basically said what you're doing and the reason you're doing it is flawed. And that, of course, struck not only religiously and philosophically, it struck economically. Now, somewhere in that city, Paul spent nearly 3 years. This is the famous library. It wasn't there when Paul was there, or at least maybe it was being built. It wasn't finished yet. Next to the library, archaeologists found what they believed to be a lecture hall. Now, I don't think there's any way in the world to determine whether this was the same lecture hall that's mentioned in the Bible. In the Bible, it says Paul went to the lecture hall of Tyrannus, where he lectured. Some versions of the Bible even suggest that it was from shortly before noon until mid-afternoon. I think that's a later addition to the text, but it gives you an idea that there was a set time that Paul was there. I don't know if this is the actual lecture hall or not, but it is a lecture hall, and it is in the center of Ephesus, so somewhere Paul came there, and he told them the truth. He was a standing stone. He drew attention to who he was and what he believed, and with all the chutzpah that a Jew could muster, he laid it on the line. Across the street, interesting, from this lecture hall is what some call a brothel. And there's a huge debate as to whether it's a brothel or not. Doesn't matter to me, because certainly in Ephesus there were many such brothels. And it strikes me to be so like Paul to bring the gospel and to teach it in a lecture hall across the street from a brothel. I love it. The passion of the man who dared to challenge the entire way of thinking. We'll skip a couple in the interest of time, pardon me. And it reached the point where the city of Ephesus was so stirred that a crowd filled the theater, according to the book of Acts, and chanted for 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Now, that's not my point. I'll come to my point in a moment, but I'd like to ask you something. In your standing stone life, where you have gone out into the world after you came to know Jesus, or much less significant, obviously, but after you came back from Israel, how many of you can honestly say you drew such powerful attention to God that anybody chanted anything for 2 hours? It's embarrassing to me how little passion we Western Greek Christians show for what we claim is the heart and soul of who we are, and what's really important. And we hide it, and we bury it, and we sit on it, almost as if we're ashamed to put it out there. This man went into the most pagan city in the whole area. He taught the gospel with all his might in some public place, and he got the whole city, in a way, to shout for 2 hours because they were so worked up. And I'll be honest, I have not been the kind of standing stone that would make the presentation of God that clear. Have you? It was tough being a Christian in Ephesus, because everything you believed and everything you tried to do was countercultural. And there must have been economic penalties. Maybe you couldn't participate in the economy of the town. There certainly were discriminatory practices against those early believers. We don't know a whole lot about it, and I can't give you a lot of detail. But certainly it was tough being a Christian in Ephesus. But you know what? Paul left there sometime, let's say, 60, one side or the other, one way or the other a little bit. You can find scholars who push it around. And then John was the pastor. I don't know if John was there before. Tradition puts him there a little later, at least the main tradition. Doesn't matter. The second chapter of Ephesus is about John. And if you thought it was tough being a Christian in the days of Paul, you would be amazed and humbled at what it took to be a believer in the days of John, because something had happened between Paul where Artemis was the world, and it still was in John's day. And John, shortly before or during or shortly after, you can debate, John's ministry in Ephesus, some of the Roman emperors decided to take their own divinity seriously. And not only to allow and to accept the worship of themselves as divine, but to begin to encourage and even require that practice. And for reasons that I find very intriguing, and we'll discuss them when you go to Turkey with us next fall, God willing, they decided to make the Vatican of that Caesar family Ephesus. And right here next to the Agora, the Romans built a very large temple. It stood on top of this platform, not in a way unlike the temple platform in Jerusalem, but with an interesting detail. Notice an artist's rendering, the temple, the altar, a statue of the emperor. Notice the columns that hold up the edge of that Temple Mount, because the Temple Mount wasn't big enough for the temple they wanted to place there. But notice something very interesting about those columns. Can you see the carvings on the columns? What they did is they carved the figures of their gods on those columns, and the columns supported the temple, architecturally, apparently, saying, who's on top is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. The authority of the divine Lord and God, Domitian Caesar, is supported, held up, encouraged, made legitimate by all the gods of our local religion. And Caesar, in effect, declared himself to be Lord and God of heaven and earth. Now, you can only begin to imagine, here's the statues, here's the temple, probably the statue of Domitian, some say Titus, standing 27 or so feet high above the city. This is what they found of it. That right hand raised, maybe with a scepter, maybe with a weapon, to say, I am the king of the universe. Now, it became tougher to be a believer in Ephesus. Because now, to be a believer put you in direct confrontation with the one who had decided that he was Lord and God, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And not to acknowledge that, not to offer the required offering, but instead to declare that Jesus is Lord, meant putting your life on the line. And whereas under Artemis probably many Christians paid an economic and a social penalty, now many, maybe in this day, but surely soon after, would pay a much higher price. And it got worse. Because after the Romans, or while the Romans built their temple, out near the harbor, the Ephesians decided to build a large gymnasium modeled after the gymnasium at Mount Olympus in honor of Zeus. Except in this case, where Zeus's statue stood, there's the harbor, here's the agora, there's what was called Verolanus Hall, and in Verolanus Hall, in place of Zeus, the emperor. And now you have an interesting situation where not only are the Romans demanding that you worship divine Caesar, but the local Ephesian authorities are saying, and we will require you to worship the divine Caesar as well. Read Revelation 13 sometime and see once if that isn't the theme of the beast from the sea and the beast from the land, both representing the power of Rome. That's not my point tonight. My point, it was tough being a believer in Ephesus. September 11, we had walked through that city. What you just did in 10 minutes, we had spent about 10 and a half hours. You know the routine. 6 o'clock, wake up, you know the routine. It was powerful. We ended the day on the temple platform of Domitian. And people were moved by the fact that to be a believer in that city meant a willingness to renounce everything you would hold dear, including your own life. And it was going to get a lot worse. And then it was 9 o'clock in New York, and somebody's cell phone rang. It was an amazing day for me. But let me continue the story. With that as the setting, John, the pastor, I think the one who was Jesus' disciple, though not everybody agrees with that, doesn't matter for our point tonight. John, the pastor, left. And he went to an island, you see it in the distance there, called Patmos. I went there the next day, September 12th, by some providential scheduling, Tom Harrington, in other words. Wasn't planned. What struck me about Patmos is how much like the Judean wilderness it is. If you remember Wadi Kilt, Jericho Road, you sort of know what it looks like, at least on the western side. And it added some weight in my mind that John wasn't on Patmos because he was being persecuted. That's church tradition, not biblical, but church tradition, maybe true. I don't even think John was there because he was running from persecution. Personally, I think John went there to do the Jewish thing. He knew what was coming in Ephesus. He knew what people were going to have to face. And what does a good Jew do before you undertake some very difficult thing in the name of God? You go to the desert. Maybe not. But John sat on Patmos. Now, I haven't done a very good job tonight, mainly because I'm trying to respect your time, and it's very difficult to teach this in Holland, Michigan, when it should be taught at Ephesus. I don't think the world you and I live in right now is all too dissimilar from this. I think life as we know it has been shaken. I think John looked at the situation, whether by inspiration of the Spirit or his own political insight, and knew it was going to get a whole lot worse. And if you want my prophetic opinion, we haven't seen anything yet. And the church, those struggling believers called to be standing stones in that tough place called Ephesus, were shaken. And it struck me as I thought about this fall and our ministry, and then as I began to think about this banquet, in some ways, that's not too dissimilar to where I find myself. What I thought was an ongoing ministry of 7-8 times a year in Israel, maybe once to Turkey, and the rest of it fit in, is suddenly changed. And much worse, of course, our lives have been shaken. But I think those standing stones in Ephesus needed what John saw on Patmos. And I'm going to be so bold as to suggest that the book of Revelation is the book that ought to be read most often. Not because of prophecy. I don't know anything about prophecy. Except after the prophets died, anybody who tries is an idiot. What I know about is life has been shaken. And I think John's vision was what those standing stones needed. You be the congregation in Ephesus. You've paid a high price, and it looks like it's going to go up. Your pastor is gone for a time. Would you please stand? These are the very words of God. I, John, your brother and companion in the suffering, the kingdom, and the patient endurance that is ours in Jesus, was on the island of Patmos because of the testimony of Jesus, because of the Word of God. On the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit. Suddenly, behind me, I heard a loud voice, like a shofar, say, "Write what you see on a scroll and send it to the 7 churches. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me, and there before me I saw 7 golden lampstands. And walking among the lampstands was one who looked like a human being, a son of man, wearing a robe that reached down to his feet, a golden sash across his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in the furnace. And his voice had the sound of rushing water. In his hand he held 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sword with 2 sharp edges. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell down as though dead. He put his right hand on me. He said, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last. I was dead. Behold, I am alive forever and ever. I hold in my hands the keys of death and of Hades. Write what you've seen, what is now, and what will soon take place." After this, I saw before me a door standing open in heaven. And the voice that at first had spoken to me like a shofar said, "Come up here, and I will show you what is soon to take place." Immediately I was in the Spirit. I looked, and there before me in heaven was a throne, and someone was sitting on the throne. The one seated at the throne had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and a rainbow resembling an emerald encircled the throne. Around the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them 24 elders. They were dressed in white robes and had golden crowns on their heads. Coming out from the throne were bolts of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. Before the throne were 7 lamps blazing. This is the 7-fold Spirit of God. Also before the throne was what appeared to be a sea of glass, as clear as crystal. In the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures. They were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second like an ox, the third had the face of a man, the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings, and they were covered with eyes all around, even under their wings. Day and night, they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come." Whenever the 4 living creatures give worship and honor and praise to the one seated on the throne who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down and worship the one seated on the throne who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before him and say, "Worthy are you, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created everything. By you everything was created and continues to exist." These are the very words of God. Please sit down. It was tough being a standing stone in Ephesus. Life was in chaos, the price was high, and it would only get higher. In fact, when I think of the church of Ephesus getting the book of Revelation, I think when that was read in the church the first time, people wept out loud. They knew what that was going to cost. Many of them, a lot, including some with their lives, most likely. And the question had to come, where is he? Why? How? Now, John's vision is amazing because John doesn't see that the trouble is going away. It's going to get worse. John doesn't see that being a standing stone is suddenly going to become popular and well-liked. It's going to get worse. What John saw in the chaos and the tears is Jesus. Still in his human form. still identifying with the believer, but now in heaven with a golden sash across his chest and fire coming out of his eyes. And what John saw was the Father of the Messiah, like carnelian and jasper and emerald rainbow and thunder and lightning and living creatures that day and night never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty." And that is what kept those believers standing stones. You see, standing stones are often erected in the good times, when they crossed the Jordan River, when they got the Ten Commandments, when Jacob had the dream. But they don't stop being standing stones when the times are tough. And what allowed the people of God to continue to call attention even in the tough times was they knew who the king was. And that, it seems to me, is of the essence of what it means to be a standing stone today. If we standing stones only testify when life is sweet and things are good and world is at peace and we can take 7 trips to Israel a year if we want to, we've missed the point. A standing stone is not someone who calls attention to how good it is, how sweet it is. A standing stone is someone who calls attention to the fact that God is sitting on the throne and Jesus Christ is right next to him. I think we believers have been placed in this setting, in this time, for exactly that reason. Our world needs to know that in spite of September 11, in spite of Al-Qaeda, in spite of Osama bin Laden and anything else that's evil, God is still the king. And nothing has changed. And I may be in pain, and my life may be in chaos, and things may not be what they were when that stone first stood, but that hasn't changed. Do you remember the story? We did it on Mount Harizati, on Mount of Olives. Jesus comes to his friend's home of Bethany. Elazar is dead. Apparently the only man in their world, at least that we know of. Their world has collapsed. And the first sister, Martha, runs out to Jesus and says, "If you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died." And Jesus says, like a good teacher, "Martha, you get an A." Right on! If I had been here, he wouldn't have died. You are right. I have the power of life and of death in my hand. Now, he doesn't proceed to tell her why he did die. But he does say to her, "You got it." And then Mary, same thing. "If you had come earlier, my brother..." Miriam. I hear him say, "Blessed are you, Miriam." I don't know what her dad's name was. "Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Your brother didn't die because God lost control. Listen to me. September 11 did not happen because God lost control. The pain and anguish that you're in the middle of tonight or were last week or will be a week from now did not happen because God is not in control. I don't know why it happened. We may someday, we may never know. But I know one thing. He is still the king. And his son is still in heaven with a golden sash across his chest and eyes that shoot fire like a Jewish rabbi. My friends, and I say that with all the Hebrew meaning that can go into the word, you have no idea what it means to me to have spent the time with you in Israel that you chose to spend. You have no idea what your faith, your passion for God, your willingness to do all this, your love for the text has meant. Show me this. Show me that you believe that Jesus Christ is King in spite of everything that's happening in our world. I need you to show me this. My faith is shaken. And if you don't show me, who will? Your neighbors, your friends, your kids, your students, your employees, your boss ought to know after 5 minutes with you that you know who's still king, even though you can't explain September 11 any more than anybody else can. And that's a standing stone. And for the first time in my life, I learned the price a standing stone has to pay. Because I had tried to be a standing stone. God knows I tried, as most, maybe all of you have. But honestly, it's been easy. Because life sort of cruised along and things got only better tomorrow than they were yesterday. But what this points to doesn't change. Take it along. Do you know who the king is? Do you know who's got seated on his right? Do you live with that kind of passion through your tears and your smiles, knowing with every fiber of your body that Jesus Christ and his Father are in control? If you know it, others will see it. It got a whole lot worse. If you go up this little side street where it says no entrance, at the top of the street, maybe from a little later time, I've talked to 2 people from the archaeological group that was working there. Some say early 2nd century, others make it later, is a fish. Some believer in Ephesus, obviously not an artist, wanted the world to know about God. I don't know what price they had to pay to have that fish there. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. God knows I want to be like that. I want to stand in my broken, dark, chaotic world like a fish. And please, for God's sake, be careful not to give the impression that that means you know why it happens. Personally, and maybe I have no right to say this, it drove me nuts. Shortly after getting back to this country, I think we came back on the 13th of September, something like that, 14th, to listen to pastors explaining why it happened. A, unless they got much better connections than I do, and B, what good does it do? I don't know why it happened, but I do know who the king is. Day and night, they never stop saying, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who is going to come. And that never changes. Pray with me. Father God, we bless you. You are the King. Your Son Jesus enthroned with you. We are struggling Talmidim who want to be like our rabbi. We are standing stones, living stones, who want the world to know about you. Forgive us where, as standing stones, we spent more time drawing attention to us, to what we've done, who we are. Teach us again that the calling of a standing stone through easy times and hard times is to declare there is a God in heaven. In the name of our Messiah, amen.